When was 100 not 100?
What's another name for an infinity sign?
And can you tell your billion from your billiard?
You can count on this being a mathemagical episode of Words Unravelled. Welcome to another Words Unravelled. I'm Jess Ferris, author of the etymology books Once Upon a Word and Words from Hell.
And I'm Rob Watts from the YouTube channel Rob Words. And today we are exploring the roots, be they square or otherwise, of myriad mathematical terms here on Words Unravelled. Jess, let's start off with that word, mathematical. Where does it come from?
I want to start out with mathematics. I did want to address the fact that mathematics, I pluralize, you pluralize, but I don't pluralize the word math, and you do.
That's right, yes. And it's somewhat a source of irritation for Brits if they do hear, particularly another Brit, say math instead of maths. So normally you'll get another Brit jumping in and sticking a s on the end if you say something like, you do the math. Which you're going to sound a little pretentious anyway, because I'm fairly sure any Brit who's saying that has picked it up from American television. But yeah, we do say maths because I suppose our logic is that mathematics is plural. But it wouldn't be that normal with an abbreviation to also pluralize the abbreviation. So I don't know. I'm
going to claim the logical high ground on this one because like economics is plural, but you wouldn't say econs if you were abbreviating it. So I think math makes more sense. But okay, like as a discipline.
Well, I'm not going to get into an argument with you,
no.
Jess, not this early in the episode. But what does mathematics, what does it literally mean?
Its original meaning in Greek, it's from mathematos, which just meant science or knowledge.
Sorry, I just said mathematos. Sorry, being childish.
No, I love it. Anyway, it just meant science or knowledge. The full phrase Greek mathematik techne was mathematical science, but mathematics itself was a word for general sciences and knowledges until speaking, now we're going to pluralize everything, but until Pythagoras of theorem fame came around.
Yeah, Pythagoras is big deal with triangles and that, right?
That's right, absolutely. He applied the Greek term to arithmetic and geometry. This is also why a polymath, whose second half contains the same root as mathematics, is literally someone who is learned in many different things and not specifically many different mathematical sciences.
Oh, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I will note that the math in this is not the same as the math in the word aftermath. The math in that is an Old English word meaning a mowing or a cutting of grass. And aftermath is like the aftermath of many things being cut down via a disaster or a war or something along those lines.
So it's nothing to do with the period after your maths lesson at school? No.
Well, I mean, figuratively, perhaps, but it depends on how much you like math class.
Good to know. You talk about Pythagoras. There are big figures in the etymology of mathematics and mathematical disciplines, aren't there? I'm thinking of algebra in particular. Can you tell us more about that one? Because you're much hotter on the Arabic than I am.
The person you're thinking of is Al-Khwarizmi. The word algebra is from the Arabic term al-jabr, which means a reunion of broken parts or restoration. It was also a word for setting bones and was used in medical contexts. But the Persian mathematician al-Khwarizmi wrote a book called Al-Kitab al-Muqtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, which in English is translated depending on who translates it, to the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing.
The English name is adorable, but I think we just need to take a moment to just bask in your pronunciation of the Arabic name there. I'm well impressed. Have you studied Arabic?
I did a minor in Arabic in undergrad, but I also live in fear of people asking me about it because I'm afraid that they will ask me to say something, and most of my memory is gone from that. As a matter of fact, so I studied in Morocco for several months, which was a great place to learn Arabic. Folks there speak Darija, which is like a blend of several languages, largely influenced by French, but fundamentally Arabic.
I've got family in Morocco, and even if I try to use the 3 Arabic words I know, I just say them. They're just nothing like how they say them.
I found it very difficult to understand Darija.
So let's get back to Al-Khwarizmi.
Excellent.
Because,
not from Morocco.
No, but he wrote this book, which I've seen translated as The Concise Book on Calculation by Restoration and Compensation. So there are various different translations of that title, but he wrote that in Baghdad in the year 820, I believe. But he also gave us another term, although not on purpose, right?
Yes, algorithm is a corruption of Al-Khwarizmi's name. His name means, it's like Da Vinci. It means like from Khwarizmi.
So we shouldn't really be calling him that, right? It means the person from Khwarizmi?
Right, basically.
Yeah, like calling Da Vinci is like saying of Vinci. You need to call him Leonardo. Otherwise, they're not going to know because there's more than one person in Vinci.
Khwarazm is in modern day Uzbekistan, as a matter of fact.
And other Arabic terms, actually one of the most fundamental Arabic terms that we use day to day is zero.
That's right. So similarly, it is from an Arabic word. It's from sifr, I believe. Someone who speaks better Arabic than me can probably help us with pronunciation. But that was both a word for zero and meant empty or nothing. It entered Latin as zephyrum and then later evolved into zero. But it's also the root of the Arabic-derived word cipher, which is a little closer to the Arabic word. And that can mean a code, but in 14th century English was also a word for the mathematical symbol for zero before it turned into the word zero in the early 1600s.
Right, and it's a number that we get very late. It's a term that we get very late. The Romans famously did not have a zero because there's no point in counting zero of something, but it becomes more useful later, doesn't it, as maths gets more complicated?
A lot of cultures didn't have a concept of zero. Any culture whose mathematical processes, theories had an additive counting system didn't have that. That's the same as the Roman system is additive. But positional mathematics, which the Babylonians, the Mayans, and the Indian Gupta dynasty are credited with giving zero all the senses that it has today: nothingness, a place value signifier, and a number. And the use of having this place or this positional model is basically like having like the ones and the tens and the hundreds place to demonstrate that nothing is in between, but there is still an amount there. So for example, to explain better, like the number 2002 demonstrates that there isn't an additional amount in the hundreds and tens place, but we know that it is still 2000 rather than just 22.
Right, the zero is sort of acting as a placeholder to tell you the magnitude of the numbers that you're dealing with. Speaking of which, can we talk about big numbers? Because there are a lot of really interesting words for big numbers in the English language. I mean, small numbers are interesting too. They go back an awful long way. It was one of the things that's really easy to, when you want to explain how Proto-Indo-European works, the easy thing to point to is the numbers 1 to 3, which are so amazingly similar, from Sanskrit far away in India to Icelandic in the West. The numbers for 1 to 3 are recognizable almost between those, which is amazing. Our word for 100 is also a very old word that can be traced back to Proto-Indo-European, isn't it?
That's right, because the word 100 is not very similar to the Latin and Greek words for 100, centum and hecaton.
That's right, but it is related. They do share a root, although actually specifically those words share a root with the Old English word for 100, as in the number, which was just hund. Now actually you can kind of see how you get from cent to hund, right? Because the k and the ch, these are sounds that swap around in languages, and t and d also swap around. So that means that cent or kent and hund actually start to get a lot closer to one another. But the word 100 is also an Old English word, but it meant something more specific than it does today, because the red at the end of 100 was an Anglo-Saxon suffix meaning account of. So
just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, the Old English hund meant, did it mean 100 or did it mean any large number?
No, it didn't even mean 100, Jess. It did mean a specific number, 120.
No kidding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, there's this weird thing with Germanic languages, how if you want to count, you actually are better off counting up to 12 rather than up to 10. it's not base 12, but they do have special words for 11 and 12. And then from 20 onwards, you're into sort of a rhythm based around 10. So it's still base 10 counting.
It influenced the words themselves, that like base 12 counting system.
Yeah, so it's not base 12 though, but it's base 10, but with the first 12 numbers being particularly important. I think it's one of the theories is that it's to do with counting on your hand, but it's counting on your 4 fingers 3 times on each one, going between the sort of the joints.
Oh, the little lines
So,
on your fingers.
yeah, the little lines. So if you count between the lines, you get 12 units. So it's, and I've been trying this out this week while I've been thinking about it, because I was trying to count what number in the alphabet S was. So I went A, B, I'm pointing at the little gaps in my fingers. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. It wasn't that good radio? Yeah, and then from that you can work out where in the alphabet it is. I'm not that was sorry. That was so sorry to anyone listening. Like, for people watching, it was boring, but for people listening, it was even worse. But anyway, so 100.
Looking at my own hand to realize that was weird.
Great podcast, staring at her hands.
We just count the entire episode. That's all we do.
Well, I could get to the point that I was trying to make, though, which was that, 100 is based upon 10 times 12, or more specifically, 6 score. So 6 times 20, because 20 is also base 20 is a really common way of counting, a surprisingly common way of counting, particularly in the British Isles, not in English, though, but in the Celtic languages of Welsh and Cornish, also Scottish Gaelic and Irish. Irish doesn't now have base 20 counting, but it used to. But all those other ones do. They all, for example, demonstrate 40 as 220, and they say 60 is 320, which I think is kind of amazing.
Is that because you can also count on your toes? Like, so you have 20 digits?
So that is precisely the explanation that was given to me when I was talking to someone about Cornish, someone who speaks Cornish. They said that people down in Cornwall will be sitting on the edge of their boats counting the fish using their hands and their toes, and that's why they've got base 20 counting.
That's wonderful.
Adorable. A weird anomaly is that Danish also has base 20 counting, which is the only one of the Scandinavian languages that does it. It's not like their main way of counting, but some of their numbers reference 20, whereas in English we wouldn't, which I think is kind of cool.
That feels like a cold environment to not be wearing socks.
maybe that's why you can't see your toes, you can't count.
Right, exactly.
Whereas gloves, you can see the fingers.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think you've hit on it. Well done, Jess. Mystery solved.
Practical counting.
So 100 that's 120 is called a long 100, right? And 100 that is 100 is called a short 100, and that those terms have been used quite a lot down the course of English history. We don't really talk about them very much anymore.
Long scale and short scale are also we'll get into that in a minute. We should do, I think, 1,000 first, but that comes up again.
Oh, yeah. So 1,000 is a swollen 100.
Yes.
Have you heard that before?
Yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorites. It's so neat.
The end at the end of it is probably related to the hund that we were talking about earlier, that is 100. And then the thus is thought to have a very ancient root that means something like strong or swollen. So 1,000 is a swollen 100, and probably just meant a large number, because the Anglo-Saxons, for example, with their thus end, they didn't actually have a lot of excuse or reason to count as high as 1,000 or opportunities to do it. You just lose count, don't you?
You don't have a 1,000 of a lot of large objects, or I don't know, reasonably large objects.
Yeah, and also the Romans didn't have the concept of 1,000 as such. They had mille, the word, but it was more vague than 10 times 100. It was a big number, and that's the case with an awful lot of words. But that's what 1,000 was. It was just a big number, but now it means a swollen 100 is 10 times 100.
So 1,000 is a swollen 100, and then 1,000,000 is a big 1,000, right?
Yeah, exactly. We should talk about the myriad
Yes.
as well.
Yes, we should.
The lost number that we don't have anymore.
So this is what I was referencing with short scale and long scale. So a milliard is a billion in US modern English.
That's right. So the myriad is what in Britain we used to call 1 followed by 9 zeros before we adopted the American billion, just because of the power of the dollar around the world, really. And the British billion was 1 followed by 12 zeros. So what is an American trillion?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. An American quadrillion would be a British billiard. And then you go on to have a trillion and then a trilliard and so on.
So we alternate.
Yeah. And by the way, we're the outliers now. Like almost all of the European languages, certainly all of the Indo-European based European languages, they call what we call a billion a milliard or something along those lines. We're talking, Russian does it, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Portuguese, German, Spanish, French. They all refer to it as a milliard rather than a billion. So I think we've lost something there by taking on the American billion, but what are you going to do?
I understand the consistency, but I do love the ending of that word because it is the same intensifying suffix that we see on words like drunkard, dullard, wizard, and even bastard.
Right. So it's what? Because it's got a lot of thousands? A milliard?
Another because it's an intensifying prefix. It's much like the ending on million is an intensifier from Latin. We've got an additional intensifier here.
So that's a milliard. But let's talk about the similar sounding myriad or myriad, which does not mean the same thing. And a lot of people have a hot take on the myriad.
There's drama here. I don't have a horse in this race. I would say I would probably err in favor of using it as a noun, but I think that's just because that's how I first read it. A lot of people would typically use it as an adjective. So myriad numbers versus a myriad of numbers.
Right. At the start of this podcast, actually, I said that we would be discussing myriad mathematical terms, and that's one of the ways of doing it, but it's not necessarily my preference. I would happily say a myriad of mathematical terms, but some people feel very strongly that one of those is correct and one of those is wrong. But if we are going to get pedantic about the myriad, we should only apply it when talking about a specific number, and that number is 10,000.
No way. Oh, that's excellent. I didn't know that. That's my favorite fact from today.
That's what it was to the ancient Greeks. A myriad was 10,000. There are some other intervals that we haven't talked about as well, because we have, the 1,000, we talked about 10,000, talked about a million, but we haven't talked about whether there's a word for 100,000, but there is.
There is. Teach me.
It's an English word, but it's a word that's only really used in Indian English. It comes from Hindi, although originally it's from Sanskrit. And the word is lakh. Have you ever heard this word?
How do you spell it?
Lakh. And if you look in an Indian newspaper, you'll see it used really frequently for 100,000. And there's another word that often gets used as well, which is for 10 million. And that is a crore.
Why do we have distinctive words for them, and why is it in Indian English specifically? I mean, they're obviously, I'm assuming they're Indian-derived words.
Yeah, they are. If they've come from Sanskrit via Hindi, you can say, these are Indian words. And the reason is that numbers are often written down in a different way to we write them down, particularly big numbers. And again, you can have a look in an Indian newspaper and you will notice this, that where we put a comma every third digit, in traditional Indian ways of writing these things down, you actually put a comma every second digit, except before the last three. If you understand what I mean.
That sounds complicated.
It is a bit of a mess. So a lakh would be written 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Interesting.
Right? It's 100,000. Anyway, but my point is that the comma goes every 2 digits apart from before the last 3. But that is why you need a word for, because we have a word for the number that comes before the comma, and they do as well in Indian English, and those words are lakh and crore.
I mean, I can't judge too much. It does feel like it's an extra step or degree of complication. But I mean, the reason we have the commas in the first place is just so we can count the zeros easier, right?
It is shorter to say, oh, they've got 30,000, to say they've got 3 lakh.
Yeah.
It's quite nifty, quite swift.
Monosyllabic solution. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it'll catch on. Who knows?
Now that we're introducing commas and discussing billiards and milliards and such and lack, let's talk about the commonly cited most ridiculous number in terms of length. That would be the Google or the Googleplex or the Googleplex.
You're starting to get really ridiculous when you're talking about the Googleplex as well. So a Google or Google, because it's spelled differently to the search engine, although the search engine is named after the number, right? It's spelled Googol. That's 1 followed by 100 zeros, right? But how have we ended up with a word for that number?
That's thanks to a 9-year-old, Milton Serrata. He was the nephew of mathematician Edward Kasner. And I love that a 9-year-old coined this term. They were walking along in the New Jersey Palisades together, and he asked for their ideas because he wanted an easy to remember name for this ridiculously long number.
And Google came out. I mean, to be fair, it sounds like a word that could have been coined by a baby, doesn't it?
It does, right?
Google. Right. So that is 1 followed by 100 zeros. What's a Googleplex?
A Googleplex is another 100 zeros, correct?
No, it's not.
No.
It's 10 to the power of a Google. Plex means to the power of. Right.
That's right.
So that is a huge number, and therefore a Googleplex, which is 10 to the power of a Googleplex, is unimaginably big. I mean, we're already into the unimaginably big, but it exists as a word and a concept, but has no practical usage, I'd have thought.
In like the terms that we've been using before on the long scale, that would be 10,000 sextillion on the long scale, or 10 sextilliard on the longer scale.
Good to know. Sextillion. Sextillion. Okay, sounds like a porn name. Oh, yeah, I'll take that on when I finally resort to OnlyFans.
I love it. That's perfect.
Oh God. While we're being pure, I didn't mention the word for base 20 counting, but because whenever I hear it, I don't know, it just sounds a bit rude to me, and it's vigesimal.
Amazing. Well, I've found my OnlyFans name.
Oh yes, with the Jess spelled Jess. Vigesimal.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Wait, how does that break down?
Well, so you know how the French for 20 is 20?
Oh, yeah, okay.
The vig at the start of there is related to that, and then you just think about decimal. And you can see it's formed the same way as the word decimal is. Vigesimal.
Now that we have our breath back after that particular break, if we do, I wanted to talk about what happens when we manipulate some of these numbers. We get mathematical disciplines such as calculus, for example. Do you know what calculus means?
I think it's got something to do with stones.
That's right. Pebbles in particular, small stones rather, or if you are in the medicinal discipline, it was also a word for a kidney or a bladder stone in particular. And particularly stones in both cases made of calcium. Calculus is a diminutive of calx, which is today is a word for a number of things, but in Latin in particular was a word for chalk or limestone.
Yeah, I'm locked in a constant battle with calc here in Germany, because calc is the German word for what forms inside your kettle if you put hard water in there, and the water here in Berlin is very hard. We call it lime scale back where I'm from, although I think it sometimes just gets called like calcium or something like that. It's calcaire in French.
Yeah, I would just refer to that as like calcium buildup, but I don't know how common that is. Maybe someone around here calls it calc or lime scale as well. I have seen products advertised as getting rid of lime scale.
So calculus is named after these pebbles,
right? For counting purposes, obviously,
Right.
because you would use pebbles for counting and performing arithmetic. Also, I do think it's interesting that it's related to the word chalk, because although the word is from counting pebbles, nowadays and in recent history, we would probably use a chalk and chalkboard to do similar figures.
And calculator presumably is related somehow.
Calculate in general, yeah, absolutely. All about counting with little calcium pebbles.
Yeah, the German word for a calculator is a Rechner, related to our word reckon. So to after the feast, the reckoning, right? That's that quote, and that means you're not going to reckon something. I'm just have a think. I'm going to have an opinion after the feast. To reckon is to calculate, right? And I think a bill in German is a Rechnung, right? Which is the reckoning.
That's the same root as reckless too, right? Like if you do something recklessly, you haven't calculated the potential consequences very well.
Is that so?
Without without reason, without calculating the consequences.
And we've got ourselves an orphan negative there.
That's right.
Yeah, no one's ever wreckful these days. So that's calculus. Can you tell us about any more?
Yeah, absolutely. I have you ever really thought about the fact that geometry, it's right there. It seems so obvious, but like you don't think about the fact that geometry means earth measurement.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, geology is study of earth. Geography must be about like drawing the earth, I guess, literally writing about the earth, I suppose.
Writing and drawing and, yeah.
And geometry is earth measurement.
And this is one of the oldest forms of math, largely because you needed it to measure your land, your boundaries, your property rights, your agricultural fields. You needed to calculate taxes based on the measurement of land and land ownership. And then it was Euclid that took this to like modern geometrical mathematical systems.
Now, I think that the imperial system is charming in many ways, but the thing I really like about the metric system of calculation and measures is the fact that it is based upon a specific measurement of the earth, an estimation from its time of how big the earth was. But to know that a centimeter is a precise unit, that if you add enough of them together, you get a nice round number that will get you all the way around the world. That I find really comforting, actually.
Agreed. I prefer the metric system and wish that were standard compared to feet and yards.
Yeah, it does make a lot more sense. I mean, living here on continental Europe, because in Britain we use this weird sort of mix of the two. We do use miles still, but if I go and get some sweets from the shop, I will ask them in grams these days. Although growing up, I would ask for a quarter, which is very quaint. But yeah, and we also have weird. This is definitely fodder for an episode where we've got to do about units.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still buy things in quarts too. Yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah. We got quarts and gallon. There are 4 quarts in a gallon, and that's your standard milk.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's one of the ways in which American English does sound very quaint to the rest of us, is these old-fashioned measurements that you're still using.
Yeah, we should update that.
Right, like I say, for another episode.
Yeah, right.
Let's get back into the maths of things.
But the back half of geometry and centimeter and everything, this appears all over math. We've got diameter and perimeter around a measurement around something. Trigonometry is triangle measurement. Interestingly, the word arithmetic is not related to any of these words. It's from arithmos, which was Greek for number or counting or amount. It does not involve the same element, metron, measurement, but it was sometimes thought to, and this impacts medieval Latin writings about mathematics. So you'll see the form ars metric based on the full etymology concept that it's from the medieval Latin ars metrica.
Right. You know, there's a thing that people used to talk about in Britain. They used to talk about the 3 R's of education. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Reading, writing, arithmetic.
Yeah, reading, writing, arithmetic. Yeah. Only one of them begins with R.
A couple other facts too. I have sort of a mixed bag of just fun math etymology facts, connections that you might not think about, like fractions being broken numbers and related towards like fracture and fragile and fragment.
Oh, yeah, that's really satisfying. I like that.
Do you know if counts count? Like if you are a count and you have the title count, is your job to count?
I reckon there is a relationship there because I'm just thinking about... Oh, no. Okay. So I'm thinking about, so it comes from French, right? The word count. Actually, both of them do. But one of them comes from compte, which is account. And one of them comes from compte with an M and a P and a T. So actually, they're not related.
Different journeys. Similar right. Idea. Like counting the action is spelled the way it is because in Old French, the word was compter. Modern French, it's compter. But in the Old French word was also a word for telling a story, literally summing up an experience, which is why recounting a tale also means to tell it again. And then the modern French word compte is closer to its Latin source computare, which also meant to count, but literally means to reckon together. That computare, which is also where we get like computing and computer.
Weirdly, French is one of the few European languages that doesn't call a computer.
Right.
Actually, right. They've very deliberately not called it a computer. They've called it an ordinator, an ordinateur, which is semantically speaking the same thing, right? It is a calculator, something that calculates or carries out an action that computes, indeed.
Right, exactly. An account, as it turns out, coming full circle on this, does not count. It does involve that same prefix meaning together, though. It's almost a contraction. It means someone who is originally meant a companion or an attendant, and then later was extended to the idea of someone who is like a municipal governor and reports up to somebody else, and therefore or goes with the land, you might say. And its elements are com, meaning with, and then ire, meaning to go. So that's kind of interesting. Right. It is not at all related to counting as an action.
But when we go to the grocery counter, that is related to counting because it's from the comptoir,
right.
Which is
where you count.
A person, or a person who counts, indeed.
Another fun fact here. Do you know what an infinity sign is called?
Well, that's sort of 8 on its side.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It's called a lemniscate.
Ooh, yeah. I like that. Spell that out for me.
Lemniscate. Lemniscate.
All one word?
Mm-hmm. It's from the Latin lemniscatus, which means decorated with ribbons.
Oh, it's adorable.
Right? It's a ribbon. It's a little ribbon. The Greek lemniskos means ribbons or material used to make ribbons. And it was in 1811 when mathematician and clergyman James Booth adopted the word for the ribbon-like symbol we use in algebraic geometry.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that delightful?
Is there any more in your mathematical bag of delights, Jess?
No, that's all I have for this week, but I'd wager we'll have innumerable opportunities to explore this topic further on Words Unravelled.
We're counting on you joining us next week as well. Take care.